Do you have a deal that you can share, like a little case study with actual numbers that we can kind of bring all these concepts together?
One example of a deal that the property we purchased a couple of years ago in the Boston area, we had a relationship with a nonprofit. They saw the work that we were doing and really trusted that we were the right partner to purchase the property from them for a really nominal dollar value, promising that we were going to keep it. I think that deal had 40 apartments for seniors with a Section 8 contract on it. So folks who are really low income and have a great place to live right in the heart of the city. What really helped make it work is financially is because of our partnership. Our partner was willing to transfer the property, not the market rate. If they had, then it would have been much more difficult to pursue financing for resyndication. We have a strong Section 8 contract, which really helps the rents be very robust and support large first mortgage note when we are able to resyndicate. Let's see, numbers. In that case, we're using low-income housing tax credits. We're using historic tax credits, actually, which are another really great tool. When you have a contributing building within a historic district, you can access historic tax credits. And then if you have an actually designated historic building, you can access a higher level of tax credits. And some states have state tax credits as well that you can pile on top of the federal tax credits. So that's a really critical resource for this project here that comes with lots of strings attached, but it's worth it for the resources that you're able to get as part of those tax credits.
Well, I've heard of 4%, I've heard of 9% tax credits. Does historic tax credit give you a lot more in terms of the equity that you need for the building? Can you give us some details there?
Yeah, based on the qualified rehab expenses, you're able to generate 10% of the QREs, the qualified rehab expenses. 10% of those are the federal tax credit, and then the state tax credits are in addition to that. And depending on the state and what's available in that state, in Massachusetts, I think you can get up to 20%, but Massachusetts has a funky apply every year and build up the tax credits as you go, and you're technically eligible for up to 20%, but you don't often get quite up there. So it can be a really helpful way to continue offsetting costs for your rehabilitation.
Welcome to another episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Today, we have Leah Whiteside from the Community Builders. And this is very near and dear to my heart because the Community Builders, they built buildings for affordable housing in areas in the state where I grew up in, Massachusetts. And frankly, they have some buildings really close to where I grew up. And this has been almost like a full circle moment for me to welcome Leah onto the podcast because seriously, without people like her, I would have never had the home I grew up in. So, Leah, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thanks. I'm great. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I've been so looking forward to this one because, when I looked at your background and saw how you went from finance to now the director of acquisitions and preservation, I just thought to myself, wow, she's moving up the organization really fast and she still has this grip on what everything is going on, and you gave me some very tangible advice. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation, Leah. So let's get right into it.
All right.
Well, Leah, for the people that don't know you, who is Leah and how did you even get into affordable housing in the first place?
Sure. Well, I live in Boston. And I've been in the community development field for around 10 years, a community development and affordable housing industry, I should say. I actually have an undergrad degree in art history. And after a few years working in the museum world, realized it was just not a fit for me. So I was always interested in the built environment. And I was interested also in city planning, thought maybe that would be fun. So I took a course at the Harvard Extension School to decide if I wanted to pursue that field. Thought it was great. And I ended up going to city planning school at the University of Pennsylvania. And then the real estate part I sort of fell into, actually. I had an internship while I was in grad school at a community development corporation in Boston. And I loved it. It was so much fun. I thought real estate was great. And I got lucky when I graduated. There happened to be an open position at that same nonprofit. And I got it. So I've been working in the field ever since.
Wow. Well, one of the first questions I always get from people is, should I go take a class in order for me to become a developer? What kind of skills or lessons do you think you took from your studies into your real world environment today? Would you say there is any?
For sure. For me, I thought that school was really helpful in teaching me how to think about city planning, to make connections between all of the different parts of city planning that are really relevant for real estate development. Just knowing a little bit about land use planning is good to know. Knowing how cities work and how transportation interacts with the buildings you're building is really important. But then most importantly, like how to interact with people, like what the community is doing, how to just understanding the dynamics of what's around the places we're building is so important. And then financial modeling. We were taught how to do pro formas and what a successful deal is. Does it cash flow? Yes, you got a good deal. Does it not cash flow? That's a failure. Start over. Don't do it. So those basics were helpful. But I will say the real world experience is the most important thing. I mean, you can't learn nearly as much from school. You can learn the basics and get a good grounding so you sort of know what questions to ask, but there's nothing to beat experience. And I actually had a number of colleagues, one in particular who I highly respect and has also risen in the ranks at the organization she works at now, who had a GED. You know, she didn't go to college, she didn't go to grad school, and she is just as good at the job as I am. So a degree is great because it helps open doors more easily, but you can also work your way up. And real estate is such an accessible field. They're all skills that everybody can build. So anybody can do this work.
Wow. Well, Leah, thank you so much for first helping the audience feel that this career is achievable and attainable no matter where you are. Because I think that's so important. I tell people all the time, I never took a course in real estate. Thankfully, I had a degree in accounting and I got a master's in tax, even though that wasn't really what the most exciting field. But learning finance and learning how to go about analyzing a pro forma, that was probably one of the most transferable skill sets towards real estate when I got into it. So I think for everybody who's listening right now, whatever experience that you have right now, sure, you can supplement it, but it does not beat the real world experience. And Leah just provided a great example. So Leah, maybe let's switch gears a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about community builders and who are the community builders and what's the company all about?
Well, TCB is a nonprofit developer, owner, and manager of affordable housing across the country. We own and operate over 15,000 apartment homes in 15 states, including the District of Columbia. And we're a nonprofit. We have a mission, and that mission is to build and sustain strong communities where all people can thrive. We're headquartered in Boston. We have regional offices in Chicago, New York, Columbus, Ohio, and Washington, D.C. And yeah, we primarily use low-income housing tax credits to build new housing and to rehab aging housing. And I would say one thing that makes us really special and sort of sets us apart is that we have really robust resident services model that we call Community Life. And we provide services to the people who live in the homes we build. So we're not just building housing, we're also often building commercial on the ground floor or community facilities to accompany the housing we're building. And we're providing people with assistance to access other supports that they need to really make their life full.
Okay, this is interesting because we get this question all the time and people are like, okay, so these people are nonprofits. How do they even like make money to cover the payroll? That doesn't make any sense to like the common person out there thinking about nonprofits, right? Because you might see a nonprofit that's a animal shelter. And so tell us a little bit about demystified or debunk the myths a little bit here for us, Leah. Like, how does the community builder, like, how does TCB make money to pay the salaries of folks like you?
Sure. I'll try to demystify. Nonprofits all need to make money. You know, they have staff to pay. That's overhead. You know, we have rent to pay. People need to be working in offices and we have computers that lots of reasons that you need money. And for nonprofits in particular, there are always parts of the business that don't make any money. They're not revenue generating lines of business. Community Life, for example, is mainly run off of grants. We apply for grants. We have a fund development group that focuses exclusively on making sure that we're able to finance the work our Community Life staff does. But then our real estate activities also help support those non-revenue generating parts of the business as well. So standard revenue lines for real estate developers are developer fees, where every time you build a new project, you build into your financing model a payment that you get at various points throughout the construction process to cover your overhead. You know, it costs time, staff time to devote to doing the work to get to the point that you're ready to start construction and all of that. So we want to be paid for that. But then we also, of course, all real estate developers want to produce cash flow from the projects that they're building. And so that cash flow gets put back into the organization to support all of the parts of the organization that are necessary to be able to own and operate housing. And then for TCB, we also actually self-manage a huge portion of our portfolio. And so we charge a fee to the properties that covers our staff time and makes a small amount of profit that, again, is all pushed back into the general organization to fund all of our activities.
Wow, you explained that so well, Leah.
Oh, good.
I mean, sometimes people forget, I mean, especially with the development fee, most banks understand, hey, you have to give a developer fee to the developer so that they can, one, cover their overhead, and two, to put food on their table while they manage the project. Because the last thing the bank will want is for the developer to say, I have no money coming in. I can't focus on this project because I'm trying to put food on the table. It's really as simple as that. And you need to generate margin in order for there to be a mission. And sometimes people have this connotation where nonprofits can make no money, and that's not true. They have to get their revenue sources from somewhere. So thank you so much for demystifying that entire thing about nonprofits for us.
Yeah,
That's
for sure.
Helpful.
There's you sometimes get agency pushback, or there are limits that agencies that fund affordable housing put on the fee that you can get. So, well, it was making many, many, many millions on these deals.
Well, Leah, tell us a little bit more about sort of your responsibilities, right? You went from finance to now the director of acquisitions and preservation. Tell us a little bit more about what was your role in finance, and then how has that evolved to your current role today?
Sure. So I actually started at the previous company I worked for, which was a smaller community development corporation. I started in the real estate development department as a project manager and rose to be associate director of real estate there. And then when I moved over to TCB, my title was finance project manager, but I was mostly focused on acquisitions and preservation deals. So development finance involves running financial models, pro formas, to make sure that the deals that we're focused on pencil, that we're getting the operating assumptions and rent assumptions correct, and thinking about different ways to adjust different parameters of the deal to make it work just a little bit better. And then when you face a financing gap, okay, what levers can we pull to close this financing gap? So we do a lot of that in acquisitions and preservation. I don't know, I could talk about a day in the life. Everything is so varied in real estate development, and that's what I love about it. Today, I'm working with my team to submit a funding application that's due next week for a property that we're planning to rehab in the next couple of years. When we're actively buying a property, I might be talking with brokers, reviewing due diligence information, the financials for a property, capital needs, just figuring out what the story is behind how a property is working, or running a financial model to analyze an opportunity. Or maybe I'm doing the same thing for a building in the existing portfolio to figure out how we could reposition it in the future.
That's really interesting. Can you tell us a couple examples of projects that you have looked at in the past where you're like, hey, why don't we do this to the pro forma, see if that works? Can you just give a couple of examples of flavors of how you would go about looking at a deal to see if it's a deal?
Yeah. Well, an example of something I was looking at yesterday that's actually in our own portfolio, we're thinking about how we could rehab it and finance it. But same approach for acquisitions as well, when you're thinking about how something might work if we're going to buy it. We think a lot about what the scope of work that's required in a low-income housing tax credit deal is. How deep of a rehab are we doing? Can we do something that addresses every single need of the property? Or do we need to really think critically about what the highest value needs are? Do we need to replace the boiler with something new? That's pretty critical. Probably not something we're going to skip if your boiler is going to go out in heating season. Versus, should we replace the flooring? Really good to do. Everyone should have brand new flooring when we're rehabbing a property, but maybe it's something that we could skip in this renovation and do out of operations over time. So that's one of the main levers, I would say, is just the pure cost of development. But then also making choices about our operations too. Are we being as efficient as possible in how we're operating the property? Because of course, the amount of operating expenses you're paying is directly correlated to the amount of debt that you can support. But then another critical piece are the rents. If we're in a market if we have an income mix that has a lot of very low income units, like 30% to 50% AMI, then should we be seeking subsidy from one of the public agencies so that we can achieve higher rents? That don't mean that the people living in the apartments have higher rents. It just means we're getting more rental revenue so that we can pay higher debt service to close a gap.
Now, when you go about and looking at the rents, right, to justify the amount of renovations that you're going to put in, are you doing a rent comparability study to understand what's going on there? Tell us a little bit about the process that your team goes through to figure out, hey, where is the ROI on this investment? And just give us a little detail around that.
Sure. Yes, definitely. When we're getting to the point of going after financing, we're getting rent comparability studies or market studies. Often in acquisitions, I would say it's way too fast paced to get those. Market studies take an incredibly long time to produce, and even rent comp studies, depending on where you are, can take a while. And usually, you have 30 or 45 days to decide whether you want to buy a property or not. So it's more looking at resources like CoStar or Craigslist, honestly, to figure out where rents are in the market that we're looking in, and making a judgment call on where we think a reasonable assumption for the rents that we're able to achieve would be.
All right. This is so good, Leah. I'm learning so much from you right now.
Good.
And obviously, we come into this world of development, right, Leah? We're thinking, I'll be honest, I used to be a kid. I used to walk by these apartment buildings and I see them go up. And I
Yeah.
used to think that's never going to be a game for me. It just seems so out of reach. So I really want you to talk about some of the problems you have faced in your career, where any stories that you can share, because I really want audience to feel like, to your earlier point earlier, that it's attainable. But more importantly, when you have problems that come up, they're usually solvable. And I would love to hear some problems that you've encountered in your career and how you solve them.
Sure. I will say first, problem solving is, I think, one of the key skills in development. Problems come up every day with a deal. I think that's the fun part. That's why I like this job, that I get to solve problems all the time. Certainly stressful, but there is always a solution. You might not like the solution and it might not be ideal for you as the developer, but there's always a solution, including walking away. Sometimes you have to walk away from a bad deal, which can be hard to do, but sometimes that's just what you have to do. Problems that I've faced, gosh, so many. I would say there are lots of different flavors of challenges. One challenge is community process. And, sometimes you face NIMBYism in development. That happens all the time. Last year, we bought a really cool property, a hotel that we were planning to convert through an adaptive reuse rehab into studio apartments for people who were formerly homeless, working with a really strong services provider. And zoning was challenging as we worked through community process, and a lot of pushback, a lot of worries about what this might bring to the neighborhood. But I think huge amount of support for the project through an extensive community process, just continually showing up and reassuring people that this was going to be great for the neighborhood and showing the benefits. I think that's one of the biggest things that all developers face is, how is the community reacting to your project? And are we sort of meeting the goals of the neighborhood and what we're proposing to bring into the community they live in?
Well, that's such a good one. Let me reflect on that a little bit, because I just talked to yesterday a person that has done a lot of permanent supportive housing in Ohio. And he told me that, community involvement is probably one of the most important things. And you have to show them and get through the first layer of fear, where they're thinking you're going to build like a prison or something like that there. Then you show them, hey, here's some more other projects around. Yeah. Do they look like prisons? No. And in fact, when you put in these brand new apartment buildings, that actually lifted the entire neighborhood up, because everybody started having more pride of home ownership in that area. So everybody's lawn started getting well taken care of. And then they said it used to cost like 27 grand to take care of a homeless person because of emergency services. But now it only costs about 10 to 15 grand to maintain the services for the area. So not only did they get community involvement, but then they also got some mathematical support behind it. And I think this is probably one of the first things that a lot of developers are going to face in terms of challenges. It's that pushback. There's always going to be someone that disagrees with your project. You can't get emotionally attached to your project, but you cannot approach that conversation thinking like, I have the best project in the world. You need me, right?
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, it's hard not to get emotionally involved in your projects when you're living and breathing this every day. You really do get emotionally attached. And I think for me, that's one of the hardest parts about development, actually, is just knowing that it's not going to be exactly how we planned it. We think we've done a great job with our design team coming up with the perfect design. And then so many people are going to come out and tell us all the things they hate about it. And sometimes they're right. We've gotten great feedback on a lot of the projects I've worked on have been hugely improved based on the community process. So it takes some humility and, proving that you're there to listen and really meaning the things that you say in community meetings. All
right. Well, this is so good. So we just talked about a challenge and maybe the entitlement or zoning process. How about when it comes to financing? Is this kind of like buying a single family home and you put in your W-2 income and it gets approved? Tell us a little bit some of the challenges that you might get in the financing piece of affordable housing.
Yeah, funny. It takes a long time, way longer than buying a single family home, depending on a lot of things. But sometimes getting from acquisition to construction, if you're doing a syndication through low-income housing tax credits, it can take 5 years, sometimes more, depending on the complexity of your project. And I think one of the big challenges we face in this industry is permitting processes just being really overwrought, really lengthy time periods to get permitting, and zoning in particular facing challenges. If somebody sues you over zoning, then your project slowed down even more. But, financing challenges, I think, or what it takes. Usually these deals are structured with low-income housing tax credits plus soft subsidy that's needed to close the gap from a city or a state, a local municipality funding agency. And there's just a lot of need for funding to build affordable housing or to rehab existing affordable housing. And there's not enough money to go around. So it just takes a long time, and proving that your project is ready to go and the best project out of all of the projects in the queue can be really tough.
Yeah, that's amazing. And for the folks that don't know what low-income housing tax credits are, definitely look at some of our prior episodes. Today, I didn't want to make Leah explain what LIHTC is because we've had so many episodes about LIHTC. Today, I really want to get into like the stories that Leah has to share. So audience, please excuse me. If you want to learn more about LIHTC, we got so many episodes about what they are. Today, it's really about problem solving because I don't want you guys to miss out on the experience that Leah has to offer today. So, Leah, what kind of opportunities are you looking for? You're tremendously successful. TCB has so many units in its portfolio already. What are you looking for in terms of opportunities, and how can people bring you guys into deals?
Love that question. We are looking right now to build partnerships, to build relationships with people, groups who might own existing affordable housing, and maybe the leadership of a company is retiring and wants to hand it off to a company that they know will keep it affordable in perpetuity. That's our mission. We buy properties and renovate them, put them in good condition so that they can stay affordable, hopefully forever. So we find it tough to go through brokers. We do work with brokers, but it's tough to compete with the sort of larger market of larger, not for-profit developers who really looking for those really lucrative Section 8 contracts. So what we're really focused on is building relationships, trying to find those partners who maybe not today or tomorrow, but maybe in a couple of years will be approaching TCB thinking, hey, we need to do something with our property. We met TCB a few years ago. We really trust them. We've seen the work that they're doing in our community. We know that they're going to do a really good job keeping our property affordable. Let's talk with them.
Well, that's really interesting. Give us a little bit more specificity around what those partnerships mean. Are you looking for people, let's say they own the land already and they want to do something good with it, or they own an existing apartment building or a hotel that they want to convert to affordable housing? Give us a little bit more specificity there.
Sure. Yeah, we do a lot of business with, or a lot of our deals from partnerships with folks who have land. Often there are churches who approach us saying, we've got some land next to our church building needs renovation. Let's do a development together. You guys develop. We'll just come back when you're done and we'll come up with a deal to occupy the space together. And we do a lot of business that way. On the occupied building side, one example of a deal that we purchased, a property we purchased a couple of years ago in the Boston area, we had a relationship with a nonprofit that we participated in the financing of this building 30 years ago, and they remembered us. They knew that we had been there ever since in the neighborhoods around them. They saw the work that we were doing and really trusted that we were the right partner to purchase the property from them for a really nominal dollar value, promising that we were going to keep it affordable forever, that we were going to renovate it and have the capacity, or they're not a real estate developer. They're a different kind of nonprofit, and it wasn't in their wheelhouse to be responsible for resyndicating the property, putting new tax credits on it, rehabbing the building. They wanted to hand it off to someone else who was going to do that work and continue their mission. So I think that's an example of a really successful long-term relationship that for TCB's acquisitions program has really borne fruit and resulted in the preservation of, I think that deal had 40 apartments for seniors with a Section 8 contract on it. So folks who are really low income and have a great place to live right in the heart of the city.
Wow, I hope people really rewind that because I think they might have missed it. These type of opportunities happen every day, everybody. Yesterday, I just talked to a gentleman and he's like, hey, I got a relationship with a church. I was like, okay, this is what you would do. See if they want to contribute their land, give them back their parking, but then now you can give them parking and then units on top of the parking.
Right.
And now all of a sudden you have this subsidy because they are able to contribute land towards you getting their project entitled for affordable housing. These types of opportunities happen every day. And if you're able to bring that intellectual capital to the table and then bring someone like Leah from TCB into the table, now all of a sudden you have brought an opportunity to a very established developer like TCB working with Leah to bring these projects to life. Please do not miss that. I really hope people caught that because sometimes it's really hard, Leah, because you're in this every day. But for someone that's listening to it and they might just, what just happened? Like that seems like a great opportunity. So I want to make sure that they caught that. So thank you, Leah, for letting me interject a little bit. And well, Leah, there's this term called a deal, and it's like such a vague term, right? Mm-hmm. What does a deal look like to you and your team? Is there like criteria that you use, like ROI, time to get the project approved? Tell us a little bit more about how you guys view what's considered to be a deal.
Well, when we're acquiring properties, we're looking for properties that are between 4 and 100 units. Anything less than 40 units is just really tough because our business model involves using low-income housing tax credits. It's tough to make those deals work for fewer than 40 units. It's just less efficient. So 40 is our minimum. We're more looking for like 100 units in a building if we can find properties that large. We're looking for properties that are in markets where we already operate and are within a certain distance from places we already are, because we have property management on site. There's an efficiency of scale to us operating adding a building to our portfolio that's right next to something else that we own. We want opportunities that have either strong rents or opportunities for rent increases over time without displacement. We are looking for things that have a strong likelihood of a tax credit syndication in a 3 to 5 year period, like max of 6 years. We're not really looking for long-term buy and hold scenarios. We just find that with our business model, it's tougher for us to make those work in the long term. So likelihood of a tax credit syndication means the state agency is prioritizing preservation deals. These are occupied buildings, and so they are considered to be preservation projects from state housing finance agency perspective. So, does the state prioritize preservation? Do they have sufficient subsidy to be able to support a deal with the standard amount of resources that are just required to make your typical tax credit deal work? Those are really important criteria.
And when they're looking for these ideas, like what's a preservation deal, like where should people go to read or learn more about what is going to qualify for a tax credit project? Is that the state's QAP that they should be looking at? Okay.
Yes, for sure. The state's QAP, which are updated every year, and priorities change. Administration's priorities change. It's always important to keep up with what the most recent QAP says for what their priorities are and what their funding availability is. There are always limits that are identified, funding limits, like on a per unit basis or on a total aggregate basis for a project that are identified. So yeah, that's the best place to go to figure out what's going on in the state.
And I love that you explained that, because I really want folks to understand the difference between you and anybody else looking for mentorship is there are people that would just throw a deal over the fence and say, hey, Leah, can you tell me if this is going to be a good deal? Or you can be a little bit more valuable and listen to the advice that Leah just told you. Go to the state's QAP, read through it. And when you bring an opportunity to Leah, you can say, hey, I read through the QAP. I've gotten some details. I think this qualifies for this. What do you think? That shows that you took a little bit more initiative than someone that just throws a deal over the fence. Because if you want to learn from someone experienced like Leah, you got to put in a little bit of work yourself. So I just want people to really kind of catch that, because there's a reason why I asked that question. It's if you just take that extra step, a little bit more preparation, that can really help you stand out. And if this world or development is really what you want to do, take the initiative, learn a little bit, listen to this podcast with Leah, and just show that you have a little bit more initiative. So thank you, Leah, for kind of going through that.
Of course. I'll just add a couple more things that we look for. You want a deal that operates well in the hold period. It takes time to get a tax credit syndication together. You can't just buy a property and immediately next day be refinancing it. So you don't want to buy a property that's not going to cash flow or that's going to cost you money while you wait for financing to come through. And on that note, thinking about the capital needs of a building, what's its condition? Are there major systems that need to be replaced? Is the roof leaking? That's kind of a big deal. And if there are major capital needs, thinking about how you might fund a reserve and what resources you need to bring to the table at acquisition to make sure that you are properly funding the deal that you're going to hold for a few years while you wait for your syndication.
Well, Leah, you just talked about all the qualitative stuff that makes it a deal, right? Mm-hmm. Especially including the CapEx items. Do you have a deal that you can share, like a little case study with actual numbers that we can kind of bring all these concepts together?
Yeah, I can talk generally about numbers. I can't share the real numbers, but I'll give some general approximations. That deal I was talking about in Boston, the senior property, what really helped make it work financially is that we were able to get a really good, because of our partnership, our partner was willing to transfer the property, not the market rate. If they had, then it would have been much more difficult to pursue financing for resyndication. We have a strong Section 8 contract, which really helps the rents be very robust and support large first mortgage note when we are able to resyndicate. Let's see, numbers. In that case, we're using low-income housing tax credits. We're using historic tax credits, actually, which are another really great tool when you have an older building that's in either a contributing building, that's the terminology, contributing building within a historic district. You can access historic tax credits. And then if you have an actually designated historic building, you can access a higher level of tax credits. And some states have state tax credits as well that you can pile on top of the federal tax credits. So that's a really critical resource for this project here that comes with lots of strings attached, but it's worth it for the resources that you're able to get as part of those tax credits.
Well, how much equity does I've heard of 4%, I've heard of 9% tax credits. Does historic tax credit give you a lot more in terms of the equity that you need for the building? Can you give us some details there?
Yeah, based on the qualified rehab expenses, you're able to generate 10% of the QREs, the qualified rehab expenses, 10% of those are the federal tax credit. And then the state tax credits are in addition to that. And depending on the state and what's available in that state, in Massachusetts, I think you can get up to 20%, but Massachusetts has a funky apply every year and build up the tax credits as you go. And you're technically eligible for up to 20%, but you don't often get quite up there. So it can be a really helpful way to continue offsetting costs for your rehabilitation.
Wow. So for that project, I mean, typically I've heard of rule of thumbs, right? 4% tax credits gives you 30 to 40% of the equity. 9% gives you maybe 70%. So with historic tax credits, how much of the equity does that typically provide for you in terms of like the overall capital stack?
That's a good question. I have to admit that I don't know.
No worries. No, I'm always curious because I was like, oh, okay, this sounds like even better than the 9%. I was like, is it like 100% equity deal already? So no worries if you need to know that number. I was just really, really curious. I was like, oh, we have never had someone talk about historic tax credits because a lot of times, a lot of people generally avoid historic projects because of how much extra cost it takes to preserve the historic quality. So that's really good. Okay, so we talked a little bit about low-income housing tax credits. We talked about grants. Is there any other type of financing that your team uses to fund your projects?
That's a good question. TCB has participated in HUD's Choice Neighborhoods program a number of times, and I worked on a Choice Neighborhoods project when my previous job as well. That is a program that provides just the extra financial juice that projects need to not only close gaps, but also really provide an enhanced level of services. Often these projects are really able to be hugely transformative for the neighborhoods that they're being built in because of that additional funding that comes from HUD. It's a grant, effectively, a federal grant for your project. We also, there are a lot of new resources coming out through the Inflation Reduction Act. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is something that we're hoping we can tap to be able to enhance the sustainability of the projects that we're either building or rehabbing. And TBD on how the terms shake out still from the folks who have been awarded the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund resources. But a lot of developers are pursuing those as a way to fund just a larger scope of work for green retrofits. So that's a really exciting resource that is brand new.
Wow. And when you hear about all these sources, it's really hard to even keep your head straight, Leah. Are you the one that's actually reading through all these documents and understanding, like, hey, how to qualify for these funds?
I think the work is split at TCB among so many people. I think depending on the size of the development company, it might be many people whose responsibility is to understand the different terms of different funding sources, or it might be one person. At my previous company, it was a much smaller shop. And so the project manager did everything: finance, performer running, the development from concept through completion, understanding all of the funding resources. At TCB, we have because we're a larger company, we have a bit more of a division of labor, but I'd say it's a combination of the regional development, real estate development teams to understand what exactly the QAP says and to give guidance to the rest of the team that they're working with, and the finance side on what the requirements are. On my team in acquisitions and preservation, we are sort of a one-stop shop, more along the lines of the smaller scale developers, where we do a bit of everything. We need to be understanding the QAPs and reading the regs of the funding resources to understand, and we rely on the guidance of the regional development teams who really know all the local politics and the state politics and are giving us guidance on how to work with all of those and making sure our read of the QAP is right, for example. But yeah, for my definitely requires knowing a bit of everything.
Wow. Because that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, wow, it must be so hard to keep your head straight. And well, Leah, this question is a little personal for me because I've always thought about what kind of lessons do I want to leave for my daughter? Because I believe in leaving lessons and skills from very successful people like you through these conversations for my 3-year-old daughter. And it's really personal to me because I don't believe in just giving them a handout. But if I can leave them with the skills and lessons from successful people like you, that's really, really important. So what kind of lessons from your development career do you think are like the most important to pass on? And it doesn't have to be real estate, but if there's general lessons, like what do you think are the most important things you've learned?
That's a great question. I think that, listen, you learn something from every deal you do, and you just have to keep building experience and remembering all the lessons you've learned from all your previous deals, which might sound hard, but I think just becomes a part of the work that you do. Like you just remember facts from previous deals when you're doing them one after another, and you just build this knowledge set. So I think learning by doing is probably the most important thing. I think being super organized is really important as well. You can't do this work and keep all these facts straight without having great project management skills, learning how to zoom in and out from the details to the big picture of your project, keep everything running all at once. And And I think knowing lots of the sides of the business is also really important. I mentioned I do a bit of everything. I know the finance side. I can run a financial model and figure out financially, is this a good idea for a project to pursue, or is this a terrible idea and we should walk away? Problem solving is the best part of the job. But being able to problem solve requires knowing the finances, having negotiation skills, just knowing all the components that make a deal successful. And one thing that I say to my children, remember why we're doing this. We're doing this for our neighbors who need housing, and everyone deserves a place to live that is decent, safe, and sanitary, you could say, but also just high quality. Everyone deserves a beautiful place to live, not just a place to live, a beautiful place to live. And for me, I think that's the most important thing and why I do this work.
Well, Leah, I hope your kids listen to this podcast, because I think that was very inspirational. I mean, Good. It's just, if our kids can grow up and focus on serving others, it really takes all the angst and the pressure off of themselves. And on top of that, you can choose who do you want to help and how do you want to help them. We decided to pick housing, but all those skills that you talked about, from problem solving to figure out how to balance the wants and the needs from everybody else, because if you can get what everybody else wants, chances are you're going to get what you want. But you can't make everybody happy, but you can do your best. But usually the hard way is the right way. So I think for all of our kids listening, whenever you're listening to this, it might be hard, whatever you're going through, but keep going, keep pushing. You can't lose, you don't quit.
For
Thanks,
sure.
Leah.
Hard work is another thing. Hard work. Yeah. This is what the work requires. This job requires a lot of hard work, and it's all worth it. It feels so good to get a deal done and to deliver housing our neighbors. It's just such a cool feeling.
Do you have any stories you can share, Leah, of people that you've been able to help through affordable housing? Like, have you seen them move in or anything like that you can share? I really want people to feel inspired. Any story that jump out to you?
Yeah, I worked on a deal at my last job in Boston where, we built an 80-unit affordable housing, brand new construction building. And at our ribbon cutting, it's pretty standard in affordable housing deals to make sure that you're telling the stories of the people who are going to be moving in, when you're saying publicly, we've done it, we've delivered this beautiful place. And look, these are the people who are going to live with it. This is a human story. And so a lot of those stories end up sticking with me. And, I remember a story of a woman who moved in with her 2 kids and just talked about how much it meant to her to be able to have this beautiful new home. Again, it's not just a place to live. It's a really nice place to live, because we all deserve that. All of those stories stick with me and make this work worth doing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Leah. I think sometimes when we're in the trenches, it's easy to forget about the people that we're trying to help. And when you hear about stories like that and how grateful people are for that opportunity, and frankly, you are changing the lives of those kids in that building, in that unit, right then and there. And that's so incredibly rewarding and so incredibly fulfilling. So this is why I think people listen to this podcast. They want to do good with their time and their energy. So Leah, we're getting to a point where this is the last question. I ask this question to everybody, because everybody tells me that, hey, affordable housing is impossible to solve for. And I disagree. I think it's just a matter of time before we collect enough pieces of the puzzle to put it all together. And even if that's not in our generation, it doesn't matter. We're going to pass on these pieces to the next generation. So Leah, why do you think affordable housing, particularly the lack of supply of affordable housing, is so hard to solve for?
Well, I could say a lot generally on how messed up the system is, going back to the tanking of the public housing program decades ago. But today, I would say the main challenge is just the lack of enough funds to move affordable housing deals forward quickly. You really have to wait a long time in most states to be able to get the soft subsidy, the public resources that you need, in addition to the tax credits, to be able to fund a deal and get it to construction closing. And in the meantime, the need for housing just continues to grow. Population is increasing. We're becoming a more and more unequal society every day. So it's hard to swim against the tide with not enough resources from the federal government, from which flow down to state and local governments. And I think another huge issue is permitting. In a lot of the places we work, it's just plain hard to get. A lot of times you face NIMBYism. I talked about that a little bit earlier in the community process. We have a deal right now in Western Massachusetts that is going through a zoning lawsuit, not really for very good reason. We could have a conversation and resolve it easily, but the neighbor chose the lawsuit path. And, things like that push us off track by at least a year, which increases the cost. We're paying legal fines. We're paying interest on the loans we've taken out to pay for all of the costs we have to pay for the architect fees and all of that to get to construction closing. And it ends up being more of a waste of public resources. These projects are more expensive when the longer that they take, and they could be far more efficient, and that would require fewer resources from public agencies, and so make them move faster and deliver housing more quickly. So all of those things, I think, are really just to make making it harder to produce enough affordable housing for the massive need that we have in this country.
Thank you so much for bringing all those points up, and especially around the facts of NIMBYism. And for people that are listening right now, I mean, make sure you share this podcast episode with Leah and just help demystify all the myths around affordable housing. It's not like guns, drugs, and drama, right, in affordable housing. It's people, hardworking people, just like that family that Leah talked about. Hardworking folks just trying to put food on the table, just like my parents did. It's great people, great working class folks that just need a little bit of assistance. That's it. So, Leah, for people that want to follow you or reach out to you, where can they find you?
On email. I don't really do social media or anything. So email, you can call me.
Don't give out your phone number. That would not be
You're
smart.
right, bad idea.
do not give out your phone number. I've had people do that, and they tell me they get calls from that podcast episode still to this day. So, Leah, what is your email if people want to reach out to you with an opportunity?
Sure. It's leah.whiteside@tcbinc.org.
All right. Thank you so much, Leah. Seriously, without people like you, I would have never had the home I grew up in. You being based in the city where I grew up in is just so near and dear to my heart. Leah, I have learned so much from you today. I'm so grateful you came onto the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on today.
You're very welcome. It was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I had so much fun doing this. So hopefully in the future, we can bring you back on. Maybe we'll talk another deal that you're doing. And then maybe we can go a little bit deeper into all the conceptual ideas that we had today. But maybe we can go a little deeper into a project that you did. All right?
That sounds great. Cool.
All right. And we are out.